Hi class, it's Mrs. Perone and we're on page 27 of your shiny math book. We are continuing our conversation about multiplying signed numbers or multiplying positive numbers and negative numbers. So multiplying integers is a lot like multiplying whole numbers. You can use what you know about the properties of operations and repeated addition to multiply integers. So we know of something called the identity property, which means if you're multiplying a number by 1, then its value doesn't change. For example, we know that 5 times 1 is 5. We know that 100 times 1 is 100. So anything times 1 is itself, and that is true for negative numbers as well. So negative 3 times 1 is negative 3, and we call that the identity property. The zero product property we also know, and the zero product property says that when you multiply anything by 0, the outcome is 0. So 5 times 0 is 0, 100 times 0 is 0, and it works for negative numbers too. Negative 3 times 0 is 0, and that's what it says here. Anything times 0 is 0, even negative numbers. And we also have the commutative property, which we talked about on the previous page, although we didn't give it a name. And the commutative property says that you can multiply things in any order and the outcome doesn't change. For example, on the last page, we talked about the fact that 5 times 2 is 10. And if you reverse the order, 2 times 5, the outcome is also 10. And in math, we call that the commutative property. So negative 3 times 3 is the same as 3 times negative 3. And by the way, they both equal negative 9. But you can reverse the order and the outcome doesn't change. So in this lesson, one of the tricky things to wrap your brain around is going to be why, when you multiply two negative things, the outcome turns out to be positive. So a negative times a negative is a positive, and that seems kind of weird. And here's an explanation for why that's the case. I'm going to do this work. I'm going to move this off to the side and do my work on a little piece of Post-it. And then just know that this information is right here, but I'm going to write it out for you and you can watch. So we're going to consider, let's see, where's our problem here? What we know already is that negative 3 times 3 is negative 9. That's what we just talked about up here, and it's written here. So one way that you can think about negative 3 times 3 is to rewrite it as negative 3 times 5 plus negative 2. So this 3 right here became 5 plus negative 2 because 5 plus negative 2 is 3. So then we can use the distributive property, which says you can take that number on the outside and multiply it by each number inside the parentheses. So negative 3 times 5 plus negative 3 times negative 2. And then you can multiply these two and put the results here and here. So negative 3 times 5 is negative 15, and negative 3 times negative 2 is positive 6, and negative 15 plus 6 is the same as negative 9. Okay. So when we get down here, it says you can use these facts to find products when there are more than two negative numbers. For example, if you're multiplying negative 3 by negative 3 by negative 3, you can group these two together, and you know that a negative times a negative is a positive. So negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9, and positive 9 times negative 3 is negative 27. And another example is if you're multiplying like 4 things together. So here we have negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3. You can group together two negative numbers and multiply them. So negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9. Here's another negative 3 times negative 3. Here's another positive 9. And 9 times 9 is 81. Okay, so we're going to reflect on some patterns that we saw up here. So for each statement, tell whether the product is positive or negative. When you multiply a positive integer by a negative integer, or a negative integer by a positive integer, the product is blank. So let's think about what they mean. So a positive by a negative, for example, like 2 times -3, or -3 times 2. So that would be a positive by a negative or a negative by a positive. The outcome is negative. It would be -6 in both cases. So it would be a negative outcome. When you multiply a negative integer by a negative integer, the product is positive, just like we saw up here. -3 times -3 is +9, so the outcome is positive. By the way, the mystery word for this page is hammer. When you multiply an even number of negative integers, the product is blank. So up here we had 4 -3s that we were multiplying, and the outcome here was positive. So when you multiply an even number of negative integers, the outcome is positive. Because you can group them in pairs, and every pair of negative numbers results in a positive number when you're multiplying them. So when you multiply an odd number of negative integers, like here we had 3 -3s that we are multiplying, the outcome was negative. And the reason is because when you group them in pairs, you have a negative times a negative, which is positive, and then multiplying it by a negative number turns the product negative again. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in class.